you describe the kind of the margins as this kind of concentric circles where if you're in the middle, you have actually, if you're the kind of, in the position of power in the situation, you're in the middle of the circles and you actually don't see as much as people on the margins. You know, people on the margins, as you describe, have to go into the middle in this metaphor because that's where the system operates from. And so for me, this really resonated because my own kind of trauma history comes from intergenerational trauma from Irish and Jewish kind of immigrant grandparents and great grandparents. And then, so for me, that was like, there was this lineage of being an outsider, being the other, being the kind of marginalized. But then in my generation, it's just no one is invested in maintaining that against me as just a kind of straight white guy. Like, the systems aren't here anymore. I'm not recognized as, you know, there's no more discrimination against Irish people. I'm not even recognized as, you know, as being Irish, and the Jewish ancestry is not, I wasn't raised Jewish. So it was very strange in my adult life to go from feeling in my bones the trauma of it and feeling like I didn't belong. And then through kind of healing a lot of that trauma, realizing that, you know, I can just go on a you know, straight train to the center and get, you know, of the concentric circles, and no one's invested in keeping me in that marginalization, which is a kind of surreal experience that I don't think many people get to have it, that extent of, I mean, as you're describing, everyone on the margins has to kind of come into the center, but it's surreal to see from both of those perspectives. And as you say, it gives you you can see what's going on at a larger scale than if you just are in the center the whole time.
Yeah, it's so, you know, it's just a metaphor, so it's not perfect, but I find that it really helps to also dispel this myth that, you know, I really describe the center as the place of access to resources. So it's basically like where the money and power is, right? And so that's always been held up as a place of knowledge and clarity and perspective based on like some kind of objectivity. And I'm arguing that it's actually like really insular and kind of unaware. And there's been even I remember like studying feminism in university like 100 years ago, and we talked about like from margin to center, like everybody should want to be at the center. And I'm arguing like, no, everybody should want to be at the margins. Like, you have so much more perspective, like you can see so much more, and there's like better music and the food is good. And, you know, it's like it's such a rich experience actually to be able to witness kind of the full circle rather than just go for the fool's gold in the center.
Right. I think this also ties into the insight that's often kind of spoken about in Buddhism of seeing, you know, often the way we see the world is through stories and narratives, and you can realize that they're really, you know, reality is kind of bigger than what we say about it. Our stories are never literally true. They're always just stories. Even science, even, you know, the stories of the dominant group. And so in that situation, what do? Well, if you realize everyone's just got their own perspective, the best thing to do is to kind of have an ecology of perspectives, like look at it from all different angles. I recently had an episode on Taoism with Daniele Bolelli, who spoke about this Taoist concept of epistemological anarchism, where it's basically saying the same thing, like have loads of different ways of knowing. And then because no one's going to be perfect, so use what's useful, you know. I think it's crazy when you realize, you know, so I was trained as a scientist, and you are taught to think this is the be all and end all. You don't really need to listen to other ways of knowing. Rationalism is everything. And then, you know, it seems to me like when people say that, they're really just proclaiming it with it's a power play. It's not true. It's just saying we're the dominant group, so we're just going to say our game is the best game. And I was thinking about this the other day with, you know, you have Ayn Rand, the kind of this far right kind of, you know, kind of capitalist libertarian thinker whose philosophy was called objectivism. And I remember thinking, like, that's just the epitome of this. It's kind of just insisting my philosophy is objective. Yours aren't. No, everyone else is wrong. But because mine is based in this tradition of hyper rationalism, I'm just going to call it objectivism. It just, from the outside, it just seems absurd. But from the inside, you're really fooling yourself and thinking you're the only one who has the truth.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's such a power move. And it requires force and domination, because in order to obliterate those epistemologies, there has to be some control of them, right? So that's why so often in the process of colonization, there was so much control of uh, indigenous ways of knowing. Practices were banned, um, rituals were kind of diminished and dismissed at kind of a basic level and completely obliterated, when they pose danger. And so that's why so many of the more modern forms of these indigenous ways of knowing have been hidden inside Catholicism with like Santeria and Buddhism, or hidden inside like capoeira with forms of dance as defense and health. And so there's all these ways that women hid herbalism and hid ways of knowing in playing cards like the tarot. And that there had to be really inventive ways to kind of escape that really oppressive form of epistemicide, which is something I talk about in the book, like these killing off of ways of knowing.
Right. What was the Catholic example you gave then? I wasn't familiar with that.
So in the Caribbean and South America, and well, across the Americas, there are ways that African enslaved peoples were able to kind of hide their indigenous and um, uh, original forms of spirituality inside Catholicism. And so there are certain saints and certain practices that show up as, once there's the kind of other layer is looked at, you can see that these are based on African cosmology. And so you find it in Vodun, which is one of the ones that's most well known from Haiti, sometimes called voodoo.